I think it's going to be a bit of a change of a tone and theme now for the next one. We've seen a couple of quite detailed presentations. I'm going to kind of step up and look at things from the departmental perspective. And as John said at the beginning, I've taken the brief relatively loosely. So I'm not just talking about digital technologies here, I'm talking about a whole range of different technologies. But there's a kind of digital theme that cuts through all of them. So just as a kind of a context setter, as you kind of expect from government, I guess, transport's key to what we do in this country. Transport underpins kind of the whole economy. It's an enabler for how people and goods move around the country. It's key to supporting economic growth, both in all sectors. But it also, in itself, provides a lot of economic growth to the country. There's been quite a few news stories this week about Hitachi, for example, bringing their World Rail business to be headquartered here in the UK. We're one of the biggest aviation business countries in the world. We're very good at our car manufacturing. Nissan build their Nissan Leaf here in the UK. So there's a lot of direct economic involvement with transport as well. But as I say, it supports a lot of what we do. And as we haven't really talked a lot about technology yet today, I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more. We talked a little bit about data, but there's lots of technology out there that can have an impact on transport, either directly or indirectly, and give a lot of opportunities and challenges to us and to the wider transport world about how we can take some of these things forwards. Just 4 examples from now, and it's not just about data, and it's not just about technology, it's about systems as well. So automated vehicles, okay, everybody knows about Google's car, Paul Newman's working at Oxford. A lot of that is really interesting technology with a whole raft of policy questions that go around it. And it's not just about roads, there's also rail, autonomous trains, self-driving trains, planes, ships. Rolls-Royce had an article in the newspapers a couple of weeks ago about drone ship fleets. Connected vehicles is a big thing that people are talking about now. How do we connect our vehicles together and to the internet? There's a whole raft of scary things about having the security of connected cars. There's a lot of opportunities there as well. We talked a little bit about data, and John Pollock's kind of introduction was quite dismissive about data and data analytics. Not sure whether I agree with everything he said. He did say he was trying to be controversial. There's lots of data already out there, and there's lots of extra value that we can get from that in understanding how we can use our systems better. There's lots of latent capability and capacity in the system that's not realised. Data is one way we can help us do that. And the other thing that's really quite interesting to me at the moment is around new business models, new ownership models. There's lots of, particularly in cities, car clubs we talked about, blah blah car, where you can kind of rent out the spare seats in your car when you're driving somewhere. Interesting policy questions around that. I think there was a report out of the US a week or so ago that said, I read it a week or so ago, it might have been a little while, a bit older than that, saying we only utilise our cars 6% of the time. So there's all these cars sitting there being unutilised. So how can we release that capacity and capability of the system? So there's lots of kind of drivers to technology in transport, and there's lots of kind of physical things that are driving our challenges as well. So we just heard about rising population numbers and the changing demographics. So it's not just numbers, we're getting an ageing society, but we're also getting a different type of youth coming through that's very much connected to the digital world, and they have different expectations and different needs for transport. How do we manage our system to deliver these across the whole domain? Densification was a new one I haven't heard. I quite like that word. So I'll talk a little bit about smart cities and urbanisation as we go through, but that's another one of the key drivers. John again criticised or commented on climate change at the beginning, saying maybe that's a fad. It's been around for a little while. I think we've seen a bit of evidence that says maybe it's more than a fad. So driver for greener transport is kind of a key component of what we're trying to do. Transport contributes a large proportion to our greenhouse gas emissions. So how can we get greener transport, greener fuel into transport? And again, that brings challenges. We have electric vehicles, we have hydrogen, we have biofuels, we have liquid air, we have a whole range of different technologies, many of which require large infrastructure investments, and there's a kind of chicken and egg kind of thing going on here. What's the role of government in supporting that environment? We're not very good in government generally, not just the UK, elsewhere, kind of picking winners. But how do we work in that space to encourage the optimal solution? OLEV in the department, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, does a lot of work with Technology Strategy Board, DEC and others to try and work out how we work play in that space. We've also got some prizes that you're probably aware of in battery technologies and biofuels that the department's funding. So we're trying to put investment into these areas to try and move the agenda forwards in a way that, as I say, gets us to the optimal place. We've also seen some of the other pressures on our infrastructure more recently, particularly those of you who live in Somerset and some parts of the Thames Valley. A consequence of climate change, potentially. I know the Met Office still, and others still don't or can't attribute it exactly to climate change, but there is the expectation that we're going to see more extreme weather. Our infrastructure, a lot of our infrastructure has been around for many, many years. How do we can't replace it all, we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. So how can technology and innovation help us maintain our infrastructure against a changing environment? And also, what do we do with new infrastructure? We've heard Crossrail mentioned, there's lots of investment going into our road and rail networks at the moment. How can we ensure that that investment and the infrastructure that we build for the next 50, 100 years is robust to the challenges that it's going to face? Again, science and technology can help us there. Things like building information management, through life management of your assets, being able to do predictive maintenance rather than reactive maintenance. Things like that. A lot of sensing stuff comes out of there, a lot of data analytics allow us to do that. So there's a big role for technology in helping us address all of this stuff, but exactly what it is and how we realise it is one of the real challenges, I think. So to give a couple of examples of kind of where we've been and where we've got to. So I've only chosen road and rail here. You could probably draw a similar picture for aviation and maritime as well. But 100 years ago, okay, the cars were around 100 years ago, but they weren't widespread. We've moved there through from horse and cart, quite a significant change into the internal combustion engine. Then it's been quite evolutionary as we've gone through. We've now got electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, etc. Is that evolution or is that revolution? I'm still undecided on that. And now we've got autonomous vehicles. And when you put autonomy, electricity, and new ownership models together, does that completely change the equation, or are we still just in an evolutionary mode? Similar with rail, steam to diesel to electric. Okay, self-driving or driverless trains have been around for a little while in various undergrounds and so forth, but it's an evolution. I guess the question is, oh yeah, the arrows are on there, but they're not on there. Are they converging? Are we reaching a cusp where things change? As I say, we'll talk about platooning. I'll mention platooning in a little while. That's a kind of combination of pulling private vehicles together into a mass transit mode. So I think some of the data, the automation, and the technology we're talking about gives us this potential to maybe have a quite significant change in how we deliver transport. And how, as a department, do we manage that? So we're actually quite good at this stuff in the UK, which puts us in a really strong position. So you're probably all aware of the 8 great technologies that David Willett in BIT has been pushing over the last few years. Listed here. Okay, synthetic biology, regenerative medicine, I'm sure we can come up with some transport applications for them, but the 5 kind of ones that jump out. Big data we've already talked about. Satellites, satellite comms, satellite positioning, etc. Lots of transport applications there. Robotics, I've already talked about autonomous vehicles, advanced materials, lightweighting and all that kind of stuff, new battery technologies and so forth, energy storage kind of cuts through a lot of what I've been talking about. So there's a lot of stuff there that's directly applicable to transport, but I think to me, there are three categories of technology that affect transport. There's those that are direct, so new cars, new planes, new powertrains, but there are also substitution technologies. We talked a little bit about people working from the new office environments, people teleworking, people not travelling to do their business anymore. So they're substituting technology and IT for transport. That will definitely change the way demand of the system works. And then there's non-transport indirect things. I'll talk a little bit about 3D printing in a little while. That, okay, can change how we manufacture things, but it can also change how logistics and freight move around the world, which could have quite a significant impact on us. And as I say, we're good at this stuff. We're also good at integrating all this stuff together. We've got one of the world's leading academic bases, many of which are here in the room today. We need to exploit that. We're also good in other bits of the system around law, around professional services, around setting standards. So we've got a great position, I think, in the UK to take our expertise and apply it to some of these really quite challenging technical problems. So I said I'd mention platooning. So this is a picture from a Ricardo trial that was run in Spain a couple of years ago now, I think. And we're certainly looking at it in the UK. So there's a feasibility study ongoing at the moment about, okay, what does that mean for us and how can we apply it in the UK? And that's we're particularly looking at it from a commercial perspective. So lorries running in close formation on motorways up and down the country, rather than as a pedestrian, as a passenger vehicle type of approach. There's lots of really interesting stuff there around technology that's been proved and that works. But if you were driving on the M1 and you saw 6 lorries kind of a metre away from each other driving down the outside lane at 60 miles an hour, what would you think about that? So there's lots of behavioural stuff that we need to think about there. I've mentioned teleworking, that kind of is a placeholder for all the digital stuff that we've been talking about today. So the apps that London have, I think London's one of the world's leading cities for all that. I know I use them all the time. So making that kind of data available and using it as an enabler for people's travel choices and how they travel around. But do they travel more? Do they travel less? As I mentioned earlier with the millennials, do they substitute travel? Is it just additional, the connectivity they have online? Some interesting questions there. Smart cities, I think we're going to talk about more this afternoon. But transport is one of the three kind of key pillars for that, with data and energy. That's Glasgow, for those who don't know, who received a large £24 million grant from the government to investigate and do these demonstrations around what a smart city might look like. And as previous speakers said, it's a big kind of agenda that certainly Europe and others are looking at the moment. And data is one of, as I said, it's one of those other underpinning technologies for that. 3D printing, it's one of my pet subjects, but yeah, it's already being used. So in some niche applications. So there's a couple of transport ones. I think that's a hinge from an aircraft at the top there. You can come up with new designs and lightweighting and use new materials that you can't do by traditional means. And that, I'm not sure the use of that bottom one there, but it does show the kind of things you can do with this technology that you can't do. But it's not just about the kind of manufacturing aspects. As I said earlier, it's about if we move the point of manufacture closer to the user, we remove all the value from the logistics chain, from the supply chain. So do you just slow steam feedstocks around the world rather than having to ship things like this, which cost a lot of money when they're finished, and make sure they get from A to B as quickly as possible? Quite interesting potential issues there. So what's the role for government in all of this? I think it's probably more of a question than a statement, but there's a role for us around setting the direction and kind of understanding what the framework that we need to work into, what are the constraints that we're working out. If you talk about applications for greenhouse gases, but we need to ensure accessibility and inequality in the systems, and look at things from a systems perspective, which I know can be difficult for government when it cuts across multiple departments, but it is a system that we're talking about here, and the market won't always provide the right thing. Behaviours, I mentioned about what you would think with a road train running next to you on the motorway. What do people really think about autonomous vehicles? It's kind of coming at us from two directions at the moment, from the Google Oxford car, but also, I don't know how many of you bought a car recently, but a lot of the modern cars have got adaptive cruise control, active lane assist, potentially automatic parking capability. Plug all that together with a bit of software, and basically the car can drive itself. So there's some interesting challenges there. 5 minutes? Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so the stuff about flexibility, and again, I think the key thing for me there is around the speed of change of all this technology. It's really quick, and when you compare it to how often you refresh your fleet in various modes, how often you refresh your infrastructure, how can we be flexible to try and make sure we don't lock in or lock out solutions, and probably also be a bit more flexible in the timescales of policy, which are not the fastest. Supporting innovation, we talked, I don't know how many of you know about MPs, it's just the Automotive Council and the Transport Systems Catapult are doing in Milton Keynes with these little pods and on-demand taxi services. I talked a little bit about the platooning. TSB is doing a lot of work in this space. So we're doing a lot of support, but really to me it's then how do you take that forward and deliver. So how do we do it? The kind of three kind of bubbles that I put around this. One is, and funding is the last one I'll come to. So this one is about convening. We have the ability to bring people together, both on the customer side, the academics, some of the more funders around Europe and research councils, bringing people together and help solve the solutions. Okay, there's a bit there about us removing barriers. Some of the barriers are legislative, some of them are more just red tape that we can get rid of. So for example, we're doing a study on the Chancellor asked us to do at the beginning of the end of last year around, okay, what are the regulatory and legislatory barriers to testing and trialling autonomous vehicles on the UK roads? So there's lots of issues about safety, about security, about insurance, etc., and we're looking through that at the moment. Public data we talked about, the UK is pretty well world leading on how it puts its public data out there. How do we match that with private data? And incentives and funding. As I say, Department funds research, TSB research councils do a lot of research. Trials are very important, but to me trials need to lead on to something. There's always important with trials just stopping at the end. So pretty much the last slide. Okay, how do we get better at working out what's coming and how do we respond to it? Everybody knows that it's very difficult to work out what's coming your way in technology, and things may go in different directions that you're not aware of. How do we roll out the tech? How do we ensure that people will take the technical risk and deal with technical risk better and manage it? That can be a real challenge. And obviously our transport system in the UK is delivered through others, so it's not the department who's delivering these things, it's through other organisations, and how can we influence them? I think really how do we basically get across from understanding what technology is, getting it ready for deployment, and then getting it out and helping it solve our problems. So a lot of challenges kind of folded up in there. So considering I've overrun. Transport key to growth, we'll take that one away. Lots of challenges that we face that technology can help us with. But it can also be a driver of change and affect the demand on transport, which is something we also need to be very aware of. Are we looking at evolution still, or are we looking at a revolution in how transport is delivered? That question's still open, I think. But as I I said earlier, I think the UK